lost knowledge, ancient texts, whispering secrets, so profound that they could reshape our understanding of reality. I mean, that's a pretty compelling idea, isn't it?
It really is.
Somewhere in the dusty corners of history, formulas, insights, the very blueprints of existence veiled in allegory, forgotten languages. And that thought has always kind of gripped me.
I think that speaks to a really fundamental human drive.
Yeah.
To seek out
Yeah.
the hidden, what was once known, and maybe deliberately obscured. There's a real allure to unlocking those mysteries.
And, well, that's exactly the kind of intellectual adventure that we're embarking on today here on The Deep Dive. So, you shared with us a remarkable source, The Fifth Element, Secrets from the Quintessence of the Philosophers.
By Theodorus Mundanus.
By Theodorus Mundanus, a 17th century alchemist. Now, think of this deep dive as your personal key to understanding his manuscript.
Exactly.
What we want to do, our goal here, is to distill his core ideas, to extract the essence of Mundanus's thought without, suppose, getting bogged down in the archaic language or the historical minutia so that you, our listener, can grasp some really historically significant and conceptually rich material. Mundanus's work, while deeply rooted in alchemical tradition, grapples with, I think, some really enduring questions.
About the nature of matter, the process of transformation, and humanity's quest for ultimate knowledge.
Exactly. So in this deep dive, we're going to be unpacking Mundanus's central arguments. We'll be looking at this idea of a quintessence, that fifth element, beyond the traditional four, the alchemical understanding of mercury and gold, which, as you'll see, goes far beyond their everyday forms. We'll also be looking at the legendary philosopher's stone, and trying to figure out why Mundanus felt compelled to share these ideas, yet shrouded them in so many layers of warning and veiled language. So
let's begin to unravel this, shall we?
So I think to really appreciate Mundanus's perspective, we have to understand the context of his writing.
The Quintessence of the Philosophers. It takes the form of a response to philosophical letters from a teen, a certain W. Dickinson, in 1683. Right away, right out of the gate. Mundanus expresses a certain reluctance to present himself openly as a philosopher.
Now, that's interesting because it makes you wonder what kind of dangers he perceived.
Exactly. He doesn't actually tell us what those reasons are.
Yeah.
But he alludes to some reasons why he's hesitant to do so.
Right. So there are risks associated with openly engaging in these deep philosophical and undoubtedly alchemical investigations.
Yes. It's a little ominous.
What environment were these thinkers operating in?
Well, exactly. And then he immediately contrasts this guarded with his genuine pleasure in Dickinson's intellect and their established connection, apparently, some 2 decades earlier. He had had a very positive experience witnessing Dickinson's chemical endeavors at Oxford. So this prior relationship and Dickinson's evident interest and aptitude seemed to have been really crucial in Mundanus's decision to finally respond so comprehensively.
So he clearly holds Dickinson in high esteem. He praises his probity of behavior, his variety of ingenuity, his skill in pyrotechnics.
That's great.
Which sounds rather dramatic. And his grasp of philosophical principles, so it seems, that Mundanus had initially intended to share his philosophical insights with Dickinson much earlier, even mentioning offering counsel in a letter from London.
He recalls with gratitude the courteous reception that he received from Dickinson at Oxford. So it appears that Mundanus was initially ready for a deeper exchange. But then, you kind of learned that Dickinson's medical practice and professional standing might leave him with less time for chemical experiments. So he became more reserved, but he emphasizes in his continued respect for Dickinson's intellect.
But then jumping ahead to 1679, Mundanus returns to England and discovers that Dickinson's interest in chemistry has persisted. He even learns from a mutual friend of theirs, Beckett, that Dickinson's passion, though perhaps contracted and covered over with business like fire with hot ashes, is still very much alive. And the sight of Dickinson's newly constructed furnaces genuinely delights Mundanus, signaling a renewed dedication to their shared intellectual pursuits. So now we get this really revealing assertion from Mundanus, he says. He declares that he has been an adept philosopher for over 40 years. And has shared the verity of the art with only a very select few individuals, Dickinson being counted among them. So this immediately positions Mundanus as someone claiming profound and long-standing mastery of alchemical wisdom.
Right, yeah.
And now the question becomes why all the secrecy? So he doesn't attribute it to, any personal negativity, but rather to just fear and necessary care for his own well-being, which he believes is essential for anyone possessing such knowledge.
Right.
And it makes you wonder about the real threats that these individuals faced.
Right, totally.
So he goes on to list, a stark series of
potential dangers.
Right, imprisonments and untimely deaths that have befallen philosophers who were too open with their knowledge. He even cites recent examples of French philosophers. And the well-known case, historically, of Raymond Lully in England as cautionary examples. So it paints this vivid picture of alchemy as a potentially perilous pursuit, operating in the shadows.
Yeah.
But his concerns don't end there. He also warns about the elixir or the transmuting powder falling into the wrong hands, implying its immense power and the potential for its misuse.
Oh, yeah.
So these alchemical secrets weren't just abstract theories. They had tangible and potentially destabilizing effects.
Exactly.
And so he goes on to say that genuine alchemical philosophers are pious and honest, and they use their knowledge for benevolent purposes, for the glory of God and the betterment of humanity. However, they are compelled to maintain secrecy due to the parvati of mortal man, human weakness, and the greed and treachery of others, both among the powerful and the common populace.
Right.
And to support this idea of hidden good deeds.
Yeah.
He provides 2 historical anecdotes. He mentions Ripley, an English philosopher who supposedly sent vast annual sums to the Knights of Rhodes to aid in their fight against the Ottoman Turks, and Raymond Lully, who allegedly gifted a substantial amount of gold to King Edward V to fund the Crusades.
Okay.
So the examples serve to challenge the notion that alchemists were solely motivated by personal enrichment.
Right.
He's making the case that their secrecy wasn't born out of selfishness, but rather a necessary shield against potential exploitation and misunderstanding. And he goes on to emphasize their lack of interest in vainglory or public acclaim, noting that many published anonymously or funded significant projects without seeking personal recognition.
Right, yeah.
He portrays these adepts as possessing this elevated mindset, valuing the intrinsic benefits bestowed by the elixir, qualities like perfect vigor of body and most high tranquility of mind joined to a wonderful perspicuity.
Wow.
Far more than mere material wealth.
Right.
So it suggests this. Deeper spiritual and intellectual aspiration beyond just becoming rich.
Totally.
Which brings us to the deliberately obscure language they employed.
Right.
Mundanus explains that. Philosophers very meticulously concealed the first matter of their work, using allegory, hieroglyphics, misleading names derived from the various stages of its preparation.
Right.
And he gives us some interesting examples.
Right.
Blackness being referred to as a crow or pitch, whiteness as a swan or white lead, a spectrum of colors as a peacock's tail, or a rainbow, redness as a red line, or minium, and even the foul odor, the initial foul odor being likened to Asso-Affeditus.
Right.
They credit their own lexicon of secrets.
Exactly.
Right. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
So it's coded.
It's almost like a coded
communication designed to both hint at and hide the truth.
Totally.
So he states that the purpose of this veiled language was to guide diligent and wise seekers who implore divine grace, those whose motivations weren't simply fame or fortune, he calls it, Ariadine's clue through the labyrinth of chemistry.
Wow.
A subtle hint for the deserving, while safeguarding the art from the profane or those in power who might abuse it.
Exactly.
And he doesn't stop there. He also underscores the role of disciple.
Right.
Simply reading these texts wasn't sufficient.
No.
True understanding demanded dedicated labor, contemplation, and practical experimentation, which he aptly calls the best comments of their books. So it's just a very active and experiential approach to learning these secrets. So now, if you were to delve into these old alchemical writings yourself, you would likely encounter some seemingly contradictory statements.
Right.
So Mundanus addresses this potential source of confusion, and he says that, for instance, when some describe the philosopher's stone as natural and readily available.
Yeah.
And others claim it's artificial and incredibly rare.
Right.
Both perspectives can hold truth,
Okay.
depending on what aspect they're referring to. The original stone, as a fundamental constituent, is pervasive, but its perfected form. The immediate proper object of the philosophic work is the product of skillful art and requires immense effort.
Right.
Okay, so he applies the same logic to reconcile other seemingly conflicting statements. For example, about their mercury. Some assert it's composed of one fundamental matter, others two, and still others three.
Right.
So he clarifies that it's essentially constituted of sulfur and mercury, which are ultimately unified. And while it might appear as three distinct principles, sal, sulfur, and mercury, in its purified state, it fundamentally originates from a singular mercurial essence with a threefold manifestation. So he also talks about the apparent disagreement regarding the duration of the work. Some say it's swift and straightforward, others that it's lengthy and arduous. And he suggests that this variability depends on the specific stage of the operation. The initial preparation of the raw materials could be very time-consuming, whereas the subsequent coction of the refined subject could be relatively rapid. Okay, and what about the very nature of the starting material? Is it metalline, vegetable, or animal? And he says that all. Genuine seekers agree that the stone can be derived from any of those realms, and ideally from all three combined. However, the sulfur and mercury extracted from vegetable and animal sources must be reduced to a pure, homogeneous, and unctuous substance, taking on this metallic character before they can be employed in the great work it's about, transforming the raw into a more fundamental, unified form.
Exactly.
Now, even the role of vitriol is addressed. A substance frequently mentioned in alchemical texts, some say. The elixir is solely derived from it. Others vehemently deny its direct involvement. So he proposes that vitriol can be considered a general source from which their mercury can be extracted. A mercury which is essential for the creation of the stone. However, vitriol in its raw state, much like sulfur, blood, oil, lead, or gold, cannot directly produce the stone. Each of these substances, he argues, contains a latent mercurial nature, a hidden spirit of mercury, or a gold of gold that can be made efficacious for the alchemical work. And he uses a compelling analogy, invoking Mercury, the messenger god, with his caduceus, which was said to resolve all disputes and discord. So he suggests that the seemingly contradictory ideas of different philosophers can be understood and reconciled by recognizing the various forms and conditions of this alchemical mercury, which he believed had an inherent affinity with all things. So the key takeaway here, according to Mundanus, is the absolute necessity of carefully comparing different alchemical texts, because one author might intentionally omit details that another includes. He cautions against expecting any single philosopher to reveal the entire process openly. And he uses this analogy of a carpenter who builds these poorly constructed stairs with missing steps or improperly joined steps to illustrate how confusing some philosophers have intentionally presented their procedures. So the ascent to true understanding is perilous and challenging. But even with the clearest explanations available in these texts, he acknowledges that many sincere seekers still feel the indispensable need for, you know, a guiding master or even divine intervention to truly grasp the intricacies of the art. Yet he reiterates that the fundamental matter, it originates in nature. And nature constantly demonstrates analogous processes like distillation and sublimation, however. The mediate matter, that crucial intermediate substance, hidden within nature's casket, the very core of all things, is inherently occult and demands immense effort to access. And ultimately, he believes that heaven ultimately bestows this precious matter upon the pious and the prudent. And so he returns to this theme of the danger inherent in the widespread dissemination of this art. And highlights the pervasive prejudice and disbelief that deter many from even seriously investigating the principles of alchemy. He even quotes Puritanus, who confessed to making 200 errors even after believing he knew the true matter.
Wow.
So profound difficulty involved. And so he dismisses the cynical criticisms leveled against alchemical wisdom, viewing them as a necessary protective measure for philosophers. And their closely guarded secrets, their writings being deliberately beyond the comprehension of the vulgar. He quotes Lully, again, stating that alchemical books are a subtlety of sagacious art to conceal the art by intentionally obscuring both the fundamental matter and the transformative process. Now, he does concede that some genuine contradictions might exist within the writings of certain adepts, potentially creating genuine obstacles to true understanding. And he points out the diverse claims regarding the secret matter. Some focus on gold and mercury, others on vitriol or antimony, reflecting a limited or incomplete grasp of the underlying principles. So his own conviction is that true understanding necessitates recognizing the full potential, what universal nature can produce, and the inherent affinity that exists between the essential principles of all things, particularly minerals, and nature's own foundational processes for the creation of gold. He concludes that the obscurity of alchemy arises from both the deliberate efforts to conceal its secrets and the genuine ignorance of some practitioners, often making the guidance of a knowledgeable master or a direct divine revelation essential for true insight.
Okay. So now let's delve into the core. His ideas. The matter of the stone. So, according to Mundanus, this fundamental matter is nothing less than the virtue of the heaven and earth and all the elements, pervasively diffused throughout the cosmos, and absolutely essential to the existence of everything. He emphasizes its foundational role in both celestial and terrestrial phenomena. The sun's heat, the moon's influence, rainfall, and the process of growth are all manifestations of its inherent power. He even asserts that Adam brought it into the world. And took it with him to the grave. And that not even the vilest creature or any of the fundamental elements can exist without this underlying fiery essence and the subtle earth, which combine to form a viscous and oily water, the foundation of their magistry. So it's this interesting
profound paradox, something incredibly common and universally present, yet also profoundly precious and difficult to truly obtain. It can be extracted in a basic sense, much like, oil from plants. But its most potent form is locked within the center of all the concretes. It demands significant effort, expense, and ultimately divine favor to fully access. And he underscores this critical need to understand the specific separation and recombination of the four classical elements: earth, air, fire, and water. But see, this fiery water, he explains, is present in all the elements, but particularly in fire itself, which he describes as an ethereal and celestial substance joined with a most subtle earth. It's a luminous substance that can be ignited through the process of distillation, but this fiery water is not the ultimate goal. He says it must undergo further refinement through a manual and artificial process to become a metalline sulfur. And this purified sulfur, free from impurities, water, and air, will then be inseparably united with gold, thereby amplifying its inherent virtues. And he identifies this sulfur as the hot and dry part of our argent vive, though fundamentally it is one and the same with its oleaginous humidity, its oily moisture. And so this brings us to their unique understanding of mercury. And it's absolutely crucial to recognize that. This is not simply the common quicksilver that we know. This alchemical mercury needs to be transformed into a metalline, pure, and unctuous substance through repeated cycles of putrefaction, distillation, and separation. He calls the confection of this pure oiliness the great hidden secret at the heart of their art. And he even mentions the crucial role of corrosive waters, what they would call aqua fortis, in the initial extraction of this oiliness from gold. He suggests that. The sharp, penetrating nature of these waters carries the oily essence into the gold, performing the initial breakdown,
Yeah.
and ultimately leaving this oiliness behind after distillation, thus making the gold more receptive to further transformation by a mild, homogeneous, and permanent menstruum, a gentle, consistent solvent of a vegetative origin.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
let's delve even deeper into this.
Okay.
Mercury of the philosophers, or Sophic mercury, as he terms it. Now, he's very explicit that this is distinct from ordinary mercury, or argent vive. And he goes on to outline a very comprehensive list of their fundamental differences, and the distinctions he draws are quite significant.
Yeah.
For example, common mercury.
Right.
You find it in specific mineral veins, mines, right? Whereas Sophic mercury is ubiquitous, present in all concrete bodies and throughout all the elements.
Right.
Common mercury is considered the son of nature, influenced by the planet Mercury, while Sophic mercury is the son of art, intentionally created by the alchemist from two saline substances that share a common origin. He also points out that when common mercury amalgamates with other metals, it doesn't truly absorb or integrate their inherent natures.
Right.
However, Sophic mercury readily admits and incorporates the essential nature of all minerals.
Right.
It comes into contact with common mercury. It exists as a fluid, liquid.
Right.
Whereas Sophic mercury, containing a greater proportion of earth than water, is described as dry, or dry and coagulated water, possessing a fundamentally salty character.
Okay.
And their thermal properties also differ markedly. Common mercury is characterized as cold and moist, whereas Sophic mercury is considered hot and dry.
Interesting.
Distillation increases the volatility of common mercury, while it has the opposite effect on Sophic mercury, making it thicker and more viscous. Gentle distillation leaves common mercury essentially unchanged. It transforms Sophic mercury into a distinct watery spirit and a fixed earthy residue.
Okay.
And their interactions with sulfur are also contrasting.
Yeah.
So, common mercury
Readily dissolves.
with black combustible sulfur. But Sophic mercury contains within it white and red fixed incombustible sulfurs.
Cool.
Common mercury has a darkening effect
Yeah.
on other metals, while Sophic mercury is known to whiten them.
Okay.
Perhaps most fundamentally.
Yeah.
He says that. Common mercury defiles and destroys everything it comes into contact with, whereas Sophic mercury produces and vivifies all things, and is the very radical moisture of all things, the essential life-giving water at the root of existence. Common mercury yields no salt unless subjected to putrefaction, but Sophic mercury inherently contains both.
Okay.
White and red salts, originating from a salt fountain within it.
Okay, yeah.
He even differentiates them in terms of their metalline nature.
Right.
While common mercury is a liquid metal in its elemental form, Sophic mercury, due to its composite principles, exhibits qualities of air, water, fire, and earth. In addition to its metallic aspect, common mercury is viewed as a metallic product, akin to a fruit, rather than the fundamental seed of metals, whereas Sophic mercury is implied to be a more primal generative principle regarding their solvent capabilities. Common mercury cannot truly and permanently dissolve gold or silver, remaining separable through alchemical processes. But Sophic mercury dissolves them radically and unites inseparably, becoming a permanent water capable of holding and transforming these noble metals. You cannot extract true white or red tinctures from common mercury alone, but both are derived from Sophic mercury. And finally, he points out that common mercury does not spontaneously dissolve and coagulate to form the elixir, whereas Sophic mercury undergoes this self-transformation through simple, sustained heating. A process known as coction. He also notes that the mutable and multifaceted nature of Sophic mercury lead. Ancient philosophers, too, assign it numerous names, ultimately contributing to significant confusion for later practitioners. And he goes on to give us a series of evocative descriptions of this
Right.
elusive Sophic mercury, calling it the radical moisture of all things, a non-burning oil,
Okay.
a non-drying earth that exists invisibly above our heads, may be referring to, atmospheric influences,
Right.
a sulfurous liquor that intensifies fire,
Okay.
the oil of a lamp in the matter of light, a cleansing and nourishing liquid, a fat salt, and so truly dry, yet simultaneously the fountain of all salt liquors, and ultimately our stone, the foundational substance of their art.
Right.
And to achieve the great elixir, this fundamental stone must undergo further profound transformations. First, into a homogeneous oil, then into the four essential humors, and finally, into a pure sulfur. That conjures back into mercury within fire. And he reiterates this crucial point. Our mercury and sulfur are one and the same thing. This essential, sulfur mercury, is hidden at the very center of all things and becomes the perfected gold of that thing
through
the alchemical process.
Right.